Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 134th City Law Breakfast. I'm delighted so many are here. Let me begin by introducing our President and Dean, Anthony Crowell.
Good morning, everyone. Just turning my BlackBerry on to airplane mode before we take flight with our extraordinary program. So I want to thank everyone for coming today, and this is one of the most exciting events of the City Law calendar each year, and this year is particularly interesting because we just came off of our graduation, celebrating a wonderful class in our 125th year, and it was actually Carnegie Hall's 125th anniversary. And we also had Chief Judge Bob Katzman of the Second Circuit, and the Second Circuit is celebrating its 125th anniversary. But guess who also is celebrating their 125th birthday, if they were alive? The model, Audrey Munson, the model for the Civic Fame statue that sits atop the municipal building. She, too, was born in 1891. It's really interesting. Of course, the Civic Fame statue was a creation of Adolph Weinman, and it was installed in 1913. So pretty extraordinary history, and we've got these four 125th milestones. So we're very happy about that. I want to thank Ross for his extraordinary work with the Center for New York City Law for 21 years. He's been doing this and been really at the vanguard, and I think he's achieved a level of civic fame that's pretty wonderful, and we're really proud of the center and proud of all the work that Ross does, hosting just a tremendous amount of programming and substantive input on all facets of municipal government. It's just wonderful what goes on each year. I also want to congratulate the four extraordinary people who are being honored today. Fritz Schwartz, Kay Murray, Claire Schulman, and Mark Davies. They're all legends, and they are just extraordinary. So we all have had the privilege We've all had the privilege of working with them or benefiting from their work in one way or another. And there are so many municipal leaders here today. I want to certainly recognize Mayor Dinkins for being here, and thank you, as well as Zach Carter, Corporation Counsel. And one of our honorees today is Mark Davies, a dear friend, and as a member of the Conflicts of Interest Board myself, I had the benefit of working with him, and we're really proud that he's here, but as my former role as counselor to Mayor Bloomberg, it was a privilege to work with him. And we have Carolyn Miller, his successor, who's doing an extraordinary job, so I just want to recognize Carolyn as well. Finally, I just want to thank Errol Lewis for being here today. I don't think there's a person in this room who doesn't admire and respect Errol's perspective and the voice that he brings to everything that concerns New York City and the state. And we're very, very privileged to have him and really proud to welcome him. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Ross to continue our program, and I look forward to a really wonderful program and honoring four wonderful people. Thank you again for being here.
Well, first I want to thank the sponsors for this breakfast and who've been with us so long. First, Greenberg Traurig, the law firm, they've been with us from the beginning. Verizon and Con Edison from the beginning, they make this possible that we can have these breakfasts. I also like to thank Francis Greenberger, who is here at this table here. Greenberger Center for Social and Criminal Justice is a sponsor of this breakfast. Francis Greenberger is one of the great New Yorkers, a great real estate person in the city, and if you look right over there, he's building 50 West tower, residential tower right at Battery Park, and we thank you for being here and be a sponsor. I also want to thank the Gold Star sponsors. Those of you who have a Gold Star on your ticket, those are the ones who voluntarily help support the breakfast. And also, I want to point out that the program has the name of everybody who's helped us financially over the last 3 years, and find your names there. there is an opportunity to continue to help. There's a form on your table, and people will be happy to help fill it out if you would like to financially support our breakfast. So thank you, all of you, and thank you also for the staff at New York Law School, and particularly the people of the center, Brian Kasuba, Lillian Valde, Santiago, Jesse Deno, and Jessica Braunstein. Now it's my, I want to do one more thing. Anthony named some people here. There are many people here who should be named, but I just want to point out one, Justice Stallman. He is retiring after many years as a justice of the state Supreme Court. He's handled many important city cases, retiring on December 31st. And I just want to thank you for your great service as a Supreme Court justice. And now for Errol Lewis, first I'd like to say that he's the reason why we subscribe to Time Warner. We're going to follow you wherever you go, Errol. You're the best. There's been nobody who has been a better commentator or, I think, questioner, and that's what I love are the questions that you ask. We're delighted you're here. Brooklyn Law School graduate, Yale University Master's Political Science, Harvard University BA. He's really smart. He's really good. We welcome you to our podium.
Good morning to everybody, and thank you very much, Ross, both for that kind introduction. As you said that, I was thinking, you could put that on my tombstone. He was really smart, and he was really good. I'll take that. And thank you for working out all the details of this morning. We had a number of date switches along the way. And I certainly want to say congratulations to the Civic Fame awardees this morning, Mark Davies and Kate Crawford Murray, Fritz Schwartz, and Claire Schulman. Ross asked me to say a few words because I am part of this conversation and help report the news about city politics and government. And unfortunately, of course, the news these days is not as good as it should be. And it's kind of a best of times, worst of times thing, where for the first time in my lifetime, it really looks like, well, I think we're pretty much sure that a New Yorker is going to be the next president of the United States. That's supposed to be good news. That on some level is good news, honestly, because however it turns out, at least there'll be a president who knows something about what goes on in this city in an intimate way. There's also going to very likely be a Senate Majority Leader from New York, from Brooklyn, no less. And that, too, is supposed to be good news. But we all know that that potentially good news is in the shadow of some pretty bad news, that in a matter of weeks, two former Senate Majority Leaders will be sentenced to federal prison, joining two others to make for 4 consecutive state Senate Majority Leaders in prison at the same time for unrelated crimes. We know that our former Speaker of the Assembly is also prison-bound, where he's going to join a number of his former colleagues. This is not good. It is not good for business. It is not good for morale. It is not good for recruitment. I'll say more about that in a little bit. And by that I mean recruitment to public service. And of course, here in the city, Mayor de Blasio and his progressive allies are learning the hard way, unfortunately, that there are no shortcuts to building the effective, progressive, left-leaning government of their dreams. We don't yet know whether what we're seeing is a sort of a shallow puddle of bad judgment or a deep lake of scandal. Either way, I tend to think it's the former, by the way, but either way, one hopes that the mayor and his inner circle have learned not to idly dismiss the good counsel, the wise counsel, and the warnings from civic reformers and editorial boards, many of whom I think are in this room, about the perils of mixing public and private money and policies. So now, we are running the risk, I'm afraid, of seeing our city and state government slow down just when we should be speeding up and getting ready for this new era in Washington. We've got important decisions that are being delayed or abandoned. And as I wrote earlier this week, every hour that our leaders spend huddling with lawyers and publicists to concoct explanations and double-check alibis and gather records for investigators is time not doing the work that the public needs for them to do. But I don't want to take the easy way out and tar everybody with who's in the vicinity of an investigation with the same broad brush. That wouldn't be fair. And we don't want to simply condemn and laugh at the convicted officials, maybe a couple of them, but not all of them, because they're not some sort of foreign and exotic species of civic parasite. I think we all have a role to play in all of this, and we all have some responsibility. U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara, who has probably locked up more high-ranking political players than any New York prosecutor in the last 2 generations, is fond of quoting a scene from the movie The Departed. This is a scene where there's an undercover operation that's going to hell in a handbasket. One cop dismissively asks Dignam, that's the character played by Mark Wahlberg, who are you anyway? And Dignam says, I'm the guy doing his job. You must be the other guy, right? And I think the progressives, frankly, have lost sight of what the job is. You know, they cannot fix income inequality or, frankly, any other problem until and unless they have their own operations in order. Today is going to mark a week since our mayor held an open topic press conference with reporters. It has been months since Governor Cuomo had a full press conference, and that's just not going to work. There's a notion, I think, among some leaders that they can ignore the press and simply run ads that are paid for in many cases by special interests. And I think we're seeing the downside of that approach. Among other things, it makes it easier for people who want favorable government decisions to think that they can buy part of our democracy. And in many cases, people end up breaking the law along the way. So I want to challenge you and let the example of this morning's Civic Fame Awards be a challenge to all of us to be the ones who are doing our job. And that maybe means expanding what we think of as our job. So we're heading into this intense political season, 165 days until we select the next president of the United States, which I still can't quite believe. And then the day after that bit of, for a local reporter, that bit of side business is done, we go into the municipal elections. And then that's going to be followed by another round of statewide elections. And then on the horizon, it's not that far of a horizon, is the year 2021, where I think somewhere between 37 and 40 council members who are term limited are going to turn over. So there's a lot going on. And I would submit to you that we all have to do our jobs and maybe expand our thinking about what our job is to get the best possible leadership in place. So for a lot of us, you know, it is literally our day job. The job of journalists is to find and report timely, relevant information about the important issues of the day to help the public, especially the voters, make informed decisions. That's pretty easy. But there's also a sort of a civic duty. And all of us, reporters, lawyers, judges, officials, ex-officials, have to, I think, help recruit new leadership and maybe more aggressively shape expectations about how they should conduct themselves. You know, I think we should all be talent scouts. You know, we all come across people, it could be a block association president, it could be a bartender, shop steward, other people, they kind of have that extra spark. They have a little bit of a glow. You can sort of see that they've got other people who listen to them, that they have an engagement and an engaging style. This is the time, and you are the people, don't keep it to yourself, tell them. Put a thought in their head. Hey, have you ever thought about running for office? I was given a speech out in Queens, and a guy buttonholed me and was telling me about all of the problems in his union, public service union. And the guy was good. He was engaging. He was witty. He was on point. He was pungent. He was profane at times. And I was like, you know, you're asking me what you should do. Why don't you just do it? And, you know, I'll report on it. You know, but have you thought about doing it? And I will tell you, there are a handful of people who I have sort of taken aside and said, look, I think you should consider this. I'll tell you what I know, and I'm not going to give you any money. I mean, I couldn't for conflict of interest reasons, but I'm cheap also. I'm not going to give you any money. But you should think about this, and you should talk to people who have done this, and you should volunteer in a campaign and see if this lifestyle is for you. You know, I mean, I don't think that's asking for too much. You know, there's a thing that goes on. People in law enforcement know this. This is the season when the gang recruiters are out in the streets of our city. They go to the block parties, they watch the kids after school, and they are looking to see who are the ones who are aggressive, who are the ones who are leaders, who are the ones that other kids respond to. And the thinking is, if I can get that kid, I'll get all of them at once, for all of the wrong reasons. We could at least be as, I think, thoughtful and foresighted as the bad guys and try and find the people who are out there that the other kids listen to. And, you know, look, I'm in my 50s now, so anybody who's, you know, under 40 is a kid to me. But so there are kids in their 20s and their 30s who are casting around, and to think back to where you were at that time, trying to figure out what they want to do and where they fit in. You can and really should make some suggestions to them and ask them to fit in with us. Let's call it us, with the people who you all are the glue, who keep the city together. You all are the leaders who talk to the leaders to try and make sure we're going in the right direction. We have a recruitment problem because every negative headline convinces, I'm convinced, tells some young person, you know what, I think I'm going to go for that MBA and the heck with it. I don't need the scrutiny. I don't need the handcuffs. I don't want to sit next to people who are doing the wrong thing. I don't want to be tempted. I don't want to be bothered. I think it's all of our duty to sort of help recruit people. I've done this somewhat forcefully. I see Zach Carter here, and I do remember, this it just popped in my head, I do remember on a Sunday afternoon when we needed a political column written, and the deadline fell to me, and we were saying, you know, well, I hear maybe somebody's going to run for district attorney of Brooklyn. This is over 10 years ago. And I said, well, I think Zach Carter might run. And I looked at a colleague, and he looked at me, and I said, I'm a political observer. Are you a political observer? Yes, I'm a political observer. So, well, political observers are saying Zach Carter might run. And as I recall, he gave me a little bit of heck for that. Would have done fine. I think the guy we have is actually pretty good, is actually very good, more than a little good, who happens to be a protege of Zach Carter. But now, secondly, I'd say you have to be a little, I think we all have to be a little bit more of a scold. You know, I live in Brooklyn. I told my wife when we got married, I said, when you call for vendors, doesn't matter if it's the plumber, the heat, anything, everyone will try and cut you a deal. Everyone will have some extra equipment on the truck. Everybody will have a discount if you give them cash and don't write it up. And we told everybody, and we've been doing this now at considerable expense, we're saying we're not those people. We're not going to do that. We're just not going to do that. You know, there are a million different reasons, but the main reason is it's not the right thing to do. You know, we tell our friends and our neighbors, it's like we don't do that. We don't try to get the free cable or the extra cable box or the gadget for the always breaking heating system that we could get off the truck for cash. We just don't do that. And I think it's worth saying that a little bit more often to people, that, you know, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. And I say this all the time to almost all of the officials that I end up interviewing. When we're in the green room or off on the side someplace, I say, can you believe so-and-so risked his freedom for an extra $3,000 in an envelope? What was he thinking? You know, because I think part of what happens when we talk about a political culture, and it's usually applied to Albany, but I think it's in general, people start responding to standards and conduct because everybody around them is doing it. And I think it is part of our duty to sort of say, you know, not everybody does that. Not, you know, there are some people who will pay a little bit extra. They will make sure the taxes are paid for the nanny, and they will, you know, go out of their way and, you know, make sure that everything is on the books with the vendors that they deal with and so forth. I would also say it's worth maybe thinking of our elected officials a little bit differently, and to maybe speak up differently to them. And this is something I've tried to explain to some community activists. I've seen community activists who swear undying loyalty to a particular elected official, no matter what that official may be accused of now, or may have not done, or have voted the wrong way on a certain issue. And you unpack it a little bit, and it turns out they helped them, you know, put on a block party 10 years ago. They came up with $1,000 when they really needed it for their nonprofit to meet payroll or something like that. And I try and tell them, it's like, they're on a renewable contract, the thing that they did because it was their job, ultimately with your money, if it involved taxpayer money, is not a permanent deal, right? I mean, it's a renewable contract. That's why we have term limits. That's why we have elections. That's why you're supposed to go to them and say, not in a hostile way, not in a snarky way, but the question, what have you done for me lately, is a perfectly valid one. And I ask people to try to consider their elected officials, their leadership, the way they would the plumber, the contractor, the guy who comes in to fix the guy who fixes your car. You wouldn't call them the honorable so-and-so, and I'm loyal to this. Well, if you find a good plumber, you should be loyal to them forever. But for the most part, if it's understood. They fixed your car because you paid them to fix the car. They fixed your roof because you paid them to fix the roof. They had obligations, you had obligations, you agreed on the price, contract law, right? I mean, offer, acceptance, consideration, and you get the thing done. I think we need to sort of apply that a little bit to, a little bit more consciously to how we deal with our elected officials. Maybe dial back a little bit on the deference, assume a blank slate every year or certainly every term, and I think we'll move ahead a lot more quickly. And then I guess finally, we do have a duty, of course, of optimism, where we have to assume that all of this is going to work out. I have heard endless amounts of commentary about a certain presidential candidate. And what I say to people is, like, you don't have to like the candidate. You don't have to love the candidate. You have to trust the process, which is different. I don't know what's going to happen in 165 days. I don't know who's going to get sworn in next January. And I don't know what the consequences of that are going to be. And neither does anybody else. However, you have to, I think, trust that what will be, one estimate I've heard, which sounds plausible, is about 140 million people will have voted on or by Election Day. At that point, you have to do a gut check on yourself and say, look, either you believe in this thing we call democracy or you don't. I choose to believe that the institutions that we have, the hundreds of millions of people who are the citizens of this country, the fair elections, because nobody is charging rampant fraud in any of these cases, is that this is what we've got. And if you're along for the ride or you're not. I get very impatient, I'm sure a lot of you do too, with people with this idle talk about, oh, I'll move to Canada and all this kind of stuff. It's like, please, just go. If you mean it, just go. If you don't mean it, let's move on and let's try and fix this thing that we have. And let me just close. I know people have questions by quoting Martin Luther King Jr., who says, it really boils down to this. All life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly, which is one of my favorite quotes of his. And it's, of course, just a fancy way of saying that we're all in this together, which is, I think, what New York is all about. And we need to keep striving and struggling to fix what's broken or what looks like it could be broken in our city and in our nation. And let me, again, thank you for having me in to share some ideas about how we can move forward. Thank you very much.
That was terrific. We have time for one or two questions if people or comments. There are microphones here. Is there anybody who would like to make a short comment? Very short. Yeah. Tell your name, please.
My name is Scott Kaplan. I am both a Facebook friend and longtime admirer. What would you say to the Corporation Council's present and former who are here today about the longstanding apparent policy to insist that civil lawsuits against the NYPD contain non-admission clauses and almost never admit wrongdoing by the city and the NYPD?
I did not know that was the policy, but I find it hard to imagine a lawyer who would not include such a provision for their client. I mean, honestly, what would you expect? I mean, wouldn't it literally be malpractice to not look out for your client's interests?
Let's don't have a debate. Good answer. Any other comment? Yes, over here. Yeah.
I will keep up the good work.
Thank you.
That's all I've said.
Thank you.
Okay.
You know, I also, I don't want to be remiss, when I talk about recruitment, someone who indirectly, not personally, but by way of example, who recruited me to all of this stuff, is here. Mayor Dinkins was a candidate who got me and a bunch of people that I ran with in the late 80s, really mid to late 80s, to get involved. That, you know, we were casting around, we were thinking that, we do a protest here, we do a little bit here and there, but that 1-2 combination of the Jackson campaign in 88 and the Dinkins campaign in 89 really brought a whole generation of people, many of whom are now elected. I mean, I was hanging around at that time with this little group. We would have brunch at Junior's every Sunday, and this is all we could afford. And we would, oh no cheesecake, Mr. Mayor. This is bacon and eggs and coffee, and we'd hang out for a few hours until they threw us out. But it included people like Yvette Clark. It included a number of people who are now officials. And we were just trying to figure out what to do. And the 88 Jackson campaign, we figured, well, we could go out and register voters. So my buddy Mark and I, we went out and we registered a few hundred voters. I went by the corner just yesterday. We just did it. Nobody asked us to. We just went ahead and did it. The next year we said, okay, we registered a bunch of people. Now what are we going to tell them to do? Well, now it's 1989. So we would go and we kept with the registration, and we also went and got campaign materials from that tall, skinny guy, the volunteer coordinator, Bill de Blasio. And we went out and did what we thought was the right thing to do. But we were sort of self-directed. We would have greatly welcomed any sign whatsoever. I mean, Bill Lynch was in fact our godfather, because you all know what I mean when I talk about recruitment. He would be the person who, even if you didn't go and try and sit at his feet, he would come and find you. He came all the way out to Brooklyn, in fact, I remember, to see what we were doing. And he just kind of let us know we were on the right track. That's really what I mean, is that you can really sort of let people know that at least they're on the right track, that you all who are arbitrators and attorneys and judges, use your judgment. You see these people, and don't let them get away. We need them.
Tell us some more stories. Give us another story. Tell us another story.
I mean, stories about what? Stories about politics. Well, I will tell you, I got shouted out personally by one of the presumptive nominee for president on the Republican side, who says that I've been unfair to him. He said this on CNN while I was sitting there on set. And, I was actually a little bit taken aback, because I think I've gone out of my way to not sort of, let how I really feel about this. But let me say this, and I think there's an important yes-no question about candidate Trump. To me, the important yes-no question is, does his candidacy and possible presidency represent a candidate you just happen not to like, and maybe you'll just try and get him out in 4 years or something like that, or push the party in a different direction? Or does it represent something more fundamental that would break the system or seriously wound the system? Between the violence, the rampant sort of fact-free insults, the conduct of the conduct and the tone, the campaign violence, the endorsements by the Ku Klux Klan. Do these things represent something that is sort of radically wrong? And by that I mean, regardless of your politics, radically wrong. And if you think that it is, I think you have to pursue one course of action. And if you think that it's not, then it's just politics as usual in some sense, maybe a little bit more hard fought than usual. And I feel like the people who are in that first camp, I'm reading a lot of their stuff, and I think they're making very cogent and important arguments. And I would go even further and say the risk that they might be right should really put people on guard, and maybe have people step up their game a little bit, because there are some risks that you don't want to take. I don't think you want to take the risk that would be represented by sort of breaking the system in some fundamental way where, we've had 44 presidents, every single one of whom was either an elected official, a cabinet official, or a war hero. And to sort of say, well, we're going to go in a completely different direction where somebody who's done none of those things, no form of public service, no military service, no knowledge of the inner workings of government. And let's put him in charge of the whole thing, make him leader of the free world. That's new. That's history. That's news. I think people should have been asking this question a while ago. I've been trying to write about it, which is why the candidate was complaining. but I think it's an important question, and that everything else follows from that. So I think that there's a sort of I know a lot of people are look, he didn't win Manhattan, so there are a lot of people who are opposed to Donald Trump in the primary. But I think there's a spectrum of opposition, and there's a sort of an important kind of qualitative and quantitative question to ask about how seriously are you opposed? Are you just going to just check the other box? Are you going to just write a check to somebody? Or do you think this is so important that you're going to tell people, let's worry about the system? And this is what I was getting at before, that you don't have to, what matters to me is not so much the candidates, but the process and the system. And let's make sure we come out of this election season with that intact.
Last question.
Yes.
Brian Kazub, I'm Associate Director here with the Center. Errol, in the fall, Professor Sandler and I are going to be starting a legal journalism course here at New York Law School for someone who is an attorney who also works in journalism. What could you say to students or young attorneys who want to potentially go into journalism? How does being a lawyer help you in your career?
Oh, it helps every day. It helps every day. The snarky but unfortunately very accurate answer is it helps you to read an indictment when they come down. If you're, honestly, it does. It does. I've been teaching journalism for about a decade now. I teach at the Graduate School of Journalism of CUNY, and every year I teach the politics and government course, how do you report on politics and government. Every year when we get to how to report on the courts, I give them the example of an indictment, and because it's a politics course, I use the latest indictment of somebody or other. And I have never had to repeat. I have never, between, Spada and Malcolm Smith, and there's always a new one, which is tragic. But that is very helpful. And I try to, I let people know, it's like, you don't have to be afraid of these documents. It also helps with getting certain nuances right. So for example, right now, there's a serious cloud over City Hall. On the other hand, a subpoena is just a request for information, and I say that on the air, I say that in the newsroom, I say that to my colleagues. I say, look, you can't run around like this is a conviction. It's just a request for information. It doesn't mean any, the fact that the information is being requested might mean something, but the mere fact of the request is not anything that you want to sort of run out and go crazy about. So, different things like that. I think also there's a certain kind of logic and judgment that they teach you, and so that even if you personally as a journalist don't subscribe to it, you should know how everybody else is going to react to it. That is also helpful. The different, and I guess finally, the fact that there is judge-made law. I think many people in the public don't understand that. Common law. A lot of people just don't understand how that stuff works. And journalists really, really need to. To understand this distinction between a legislative commandment, a judicial interpretation of that commandment, an executive order. It's a lot of that stuff is gobbledygook to many journalists, and they put gobbledygook in the papers. And you all laugh at it and say, oh, the journalists don't know anything, and you're partly right. But we've got to fix that. So yeah, more legal training. I also, by the way, I try to tell people who some of the lawyers who are out there. We don't have a club or anything like that, but there are a lot of people with law degrees who are, You know, I mean, Art Brown, who was my former boss and a really great guy, who runs the editorial board at the Daily News, is an attorney, keeps his credentials up, and, you know, and if you see him, I almost said deposed, but if you see him talk to people in some of these candidate interviews, you can tell he has legal training, because he kind of walks them right down the road, asks about all of the implications, springs the trap at the end, you know. It's a great skill to have. So I look forward, by the way, to talking some more with you, so we can maybe make something work together. Thanks.
Stay right here, sir. But this has been a very stimulating morning. I'm so glad you came, and you really have delivered a wonderful message for all of us. We always like to give a token of appreciation, a product of the law school, and this is one of the more recent issues of Law Review. It's dedicated to Martin Luther King on the 50th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech, and it includes an article by Fritz Schwartz as well.
Oh, great.
So we give this to you with thanks for a wonderful morning, and now, and thank you so much for coming. And now, Anthony, we now would now do the Civic Fame Awards. This is our second annual Civic Fame Awards, and we are delighted to do this. We have call up Anthony. Anthony Crowell, our dean. Okay, the first one's from Mark Davies. Mark, you come on up. Yeah. We've dredged back in some of our photographs, and there's Mark delivering information at the annual CLE presentations that we've done here. Mark has been a partner to us. He really has been. He came to the law school probably 20 years ago and said, look, we need to have an annual CLE program on conflicts of interest, and can you do it? And we said yes, and we have been doing it now for 20 years. It is the culmination of a year of education in the conflicts of interest area, and Mark's inspired that. He has inspired this book that we annually publish on conflicts of interest, and what it represents is Mark's vision about conflicts of interest, which is that it has to be understandable, it has to be clear. The object of it is to prevention, not to trap people, is to make sure they understand what they have to do, and has led the educational efforts of which we've been a part and which we have enjoyed so much. He's also, turns out, an expert in New York practice. Who knew? He writes the pocket parts that advises attorneys on how to handle that. He is a prolific writer on conflicts of interest, where he no holds barred. The last title of his article was "The New York State Whiffs on Conflicts of Interest," meaning that they had screwed it up again. He has been a wonderful civil servant. He leads the idea of the telephone advice. Now, I remember as a young lawyer, I loved telephone advice. I did not want to go to the library. What you wanted to know, who knew the answer, and you wanted to talk to that person. And so you either walked the halls, you got on the telephone. Mark has institutionalized that here for conflicts of interest. You call him up there, thousands of calls a year. People call him and say, can I do this, can I do it? Mark answers, and now he's got the whole staff of the Conflicts of Interest Board doing it. It is a tremendous service to be able to get those answers that way. Mark is, in my mind, has been the conscience of the Conflicts of Interest Board, 23 years there. He's retired now, and with great pleasure we present him with the Civic Fame Award, and what it says is, for extraordinary service for 22 years as Executive Director of the Conflicts of Interest Board, where he advised, educated, and interpreted conflicts of interest rules for the city's public servants with fairness, openness, intelligent, and most of all, common sense. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Mark, you want to say anything? You want to say anything?
Oh, well, I didn't know. They didn't tell me. No, I guess a couple points. One is, first of all, it's a great honor. It really is, and I thank you. I thank you both. It's been wonderful working with Anthony. Without Ross, there wouldn't be an annual Conflicts of Interest seminar. Just a couple points. You know, I mean, it's wonderful to get these awards. It really is. You know, and we always say, you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Most of the time, we don't say who those giants are. But let me just name them because many of them are in the room right here. Holly Hellman and Evan, Julia, Baruni, Jeff and Alex, and Carolyn, Wayne Hawley. So, I think Michelle is over here somewhere. So, those are the giants on whose shoulders we stand. And Julia, did you Miss Julia? Yeah, Julia. On whose shoulders we stand. So I thank all of them because they're the ones that really, really did the work, not me. And a second point really to address something that Mr. Lewis said, and that's about personal integrity. That really means something, and I hope that everyone in this room does turn down those deals. I mean, I do, as you do. Sometimes I'll just flat out say, I've been in the conflicts of interest, the ethics business for 25 years. I mean, if I'm not honest, who is? I think that applies to every one of us who is subject to any kind of code of ethics on the job, whether it's, journalism or teaching or government service or judges or lawyers, any of the rest of them. It's the personal integrity. I think that's really where it starts. I was asked one time when I was given a talk up in Albany to, it's mainly public servants and state legislators and so forth. And they asked, well, what do we do? We're under attack all the time. What do we do? I said, you know what I do? I tell people I am proud to be the employee of the city of New York. That's what I tell them. And I think that's where it starts. I mean, we're proud to be here. So anyway, thanks a lot. Thank you both.
Thank you. Next, for Kay Murray, Kay Crawford Murray. Kay has asked not to walk up, so if you would stand or just let us know. Yeah, wave, Kay Murray. Kay. Kay is one of our earliest friends of the Center for New York City Law. She was wonderful, always attending, always participating in the programs. She graduated from Bennington College in 1956. In 1959, she met her husband, many of you knew Arch Murray, at a party in New York City, and married in 1961. Kay, with Arch, spent 2 years in Albany, where Arch was assistant to Governor Rockefeller, then came back, and she had a master's at Teachers College, Columbia, then her JD from Columbia, where she was a Harlem Fisk Stone Scholar in 1976. And then in 1979, when Mayor Edward Koch became mayor, there were major issues around juvenile justice, and particularly around the Spofford Juvenile Center. And it became a major issue such that the city council and the mayor created the Department of Juvenile Justice. It was a new department, it was a new effort to deal with juvenile justice, and they turned to Kay Murray to be the general counsel. She was the general counsel there, the first general counsel, and stayed into 2001. She had an important role in building that department and dealing with the immense, difficult, and complex issues involving juvenile justice, which we are still working on and still working hard to solve. She also was extremely active in the Bar Association, leading the Committee on Women in Law, and the Bar Association, in gratitude, created the Kay Crawford Murray Award, annually given to a woman in the profession who has dedicated her time to advancing the professional development of women attorneys. So there is an annual award at the State Bar meeting given in her name. Many other awards that she and her husband, Arch, received, both a very important power couple in the city in so many words. And I asked a number of people who worked with her about Kay, and Jeffrey Friedlander, who's here and was a Civic Fame Award last year, said about Kay, all dealings, when she was the general counsel at the Department of Juvenile Justice, all dealings with her were a pleasure. She brightened every meeting with her presence. We honor Kay Crawford Murray with a Civic Fame Award.
Thank you. The one comment I would make is that I considered the Conflicts of Interest Board my source for every question I had that had to be answered. And I appreciated having that availability so much, without which I couldn't manage. So I wanted Mark to know how much I appreciated having him as a resource. And so thank you. And I thank you for this wonderful law school, and thank those of you who are here because you want to say thank you as well. So thank you for this, and thank you for the honor.
I should say that the photograph is of Kay asking a question at one of these breakfasts, probably in 1994, 1995. Our next honoree is Frederick A.O. Schwartz, Jr. Will you come on up? Yeah. Fritz, a great friend, a quintessential private attorney in public service, a special friend. Resume, a wonderful resume, magna cum laude, Harvard, magna cum laude, Harvard Law Review, Harvard Law School, Harvard Law Review, clerk for Judge Lombard on the Second Circuit, and then left to work for a year in Nigeria as an assistant commissioner in the law revision efforts there. Became a partner at Cravath, and which for many people would be the end of the story. That would be the last item on the resume, but that's hardly true of Fritz. He has been such an important person in so many different areas. Over his years, he's chaired the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Vera Institute of Justice, the Fund for the City of New York, Atlantic Philanthropies. He has been extremely active in the public sector, and then, of course, Corporation Counsel in 1982 to 1986, and then chaired the most important Charter Revision Commission since the Greater City was formed. That was the 1989 Charter Revision Commission. In both of the positions as Corporation Counsel and as Charter Revision Commission, what you really saw in Fritz was a total commitment to diversity and inclusion. He in many ways was way ahead of me in this, but he understood that that's where the city had to go. And I remember when I was in government and he was in government, he worked so hard on the anti-apartheid effort, going down to Washington to try and get the federal government to change its position. And then as the Charter Revision Commission, he understood the city had to change its structure if it was going to really do something on diversity and inclusion. And you see the results of that extraordinary work in the members of the city council, the elected officials in the boroughs, and the city hall. That would not have happened, in my judgment, if Fritz had not led that 89 charter to think of the structure of the city as it ought to be. And then he's been enormously important to New York Law School and the Center for New York City Law. He inspired our 1998 symposium on the 100th anniversary of the New York City Charter. It was a wonderful symposium that he led that, and resulted in a gigantic article. I mean, the longest article this Law Review ever published, maybe the longest ever published, a 450-page article on the New York City Charter, which it turns out to be the definitive history. And actually, what's interesting, I had looked at it, there's an entire chapter about you, Claire, in there, where you turned out to be very important to Fritz. He needed to get approval of the voters, and you were a pretty important person, and the story tells him there is he wasn't able to get your consent to support until he had dinner at your home in Queens, where it was finally settled. But this history is really an important history. It is the definitive history on the city charter. And then we did another symposium in 2008 on the Corporation Council. Again, Fritz led that, and then he participated last year in the Civic Fame Awards. He wrote the article on Martin Luther King in one of the latest issues of the Law Review. He has been wonderful to this law school, wonderful to the Center for New York City Law. And for this lifetime of public service, we are delighted to present to Fritz the Civic Fame Award. Let me just read what we wrote here. Frederick A.O. Schwartz Jr. for his extraordinary service as Corporation Counsel, Charter Revision Commission Chair, and advisor to mayors, where he counseled and led New York City to create policies and structures that fostered diversity, inclusion, and justice.
So the first thing I should say is that I could have done none of what I've done without all the great people I worked with in government, out of government, as a young person, right to today, where I work at the Brennan Center for Justice, which is a fantastic organization. I have had the benefit of New York Law School asking me to write three articles, and actually you mentioned them, but I want to say that was really a great privilege to have the chance to think hard and write about, in 400 pages, the politics and policy of the New York City Charter, and then an article on how government lawyers can make policy as well as law. And finally, the very personal story I told in the volume about Martin Luther, on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's speech, where it's called My Awakening to Civil Rights, and it talks about how a young, privileged kid who knew no black people became eventually convinced that that was the issue for our time, diversity and inclusion, as Ross put it. So I'm grateful to your school very much for giving me the chance to write those articles. Now, the second point I want to make is that working for government, picking up on what Errol Lewis said about urging people to run, which I never did. I'm not quite sure why. I think I didn't want to go out and raise the money, but who knows. But working for government is something everybody should do. Every lawyer should aspire to do that. And I analyze in talking to young lawyers what gives you kicks. And there are three things, two of which you can get in private practice, but one of which you can only get in working for the government. One kick is just doing your job professionally well. You can get that whether you're working in private practice or whether you're working in the government. Another kick is helping individuals. You can get that also in both. I got as much of a kick out of helping Tom Watson when he was the chairman of IBM, involved in a huge monopoly case where the government wanted to destroy IBM. I got as much of a kick in helping him personally as I did in helping, let's say, Ed Koch when he was faced with the corruption scandal, and I helped him work his way through that by becoming the best reformer as the best way to fight allegations of corruption. That you can get in both private and public service as a lawyer. What you can't get in private practice is the thrill of being able to influence public policy in a way that helps a lot of people. That you can only do in government, and it's why every lawyer from every law school should aspire to work in the government. Then I thought it would be useful to just finish about the pleasure I get now at working at the Brennan Center for Justice, where again I'm working with incredibly wonderful people, and it enables me in thinking about big issues to meld the two aspects of my public life, which have been first, national security and civil rights. And Ross was very kind in the things he said about what I've done, one of which, though, was at age 39 being promoted to be being appointed as the chief counsel of the church committee that for the first time investigated and exposed the wrongdoing of the FBI, principally, the CIA, the NSA, and so forth. And so in my early life, I focused on national issues, civil rights, national security, and I still do some of those things at the Brennan Center, where I've written 2 books that are really focused on national security, Unchecked and Unbalanced, Presidential Power in a Time of Terror, and Democracy in the Dark, The Seduction of Government Secrecy. But I also have the chance at the Brennan Center to work on city issues still. One example was how we worked with the City Council to have an Inspector General for the Police Department, which we thought would be very valuable. Anyway, I'm very honored to have gotten this, and thank you Alice for what you also do here.
The photograph up is of Fritz Schwartz at the symposium we had here on the charter, and he's speaking to Peter Vallone and Mark Green, and they seem to be listening very intensely. And now Claire Schulman, the awardee. A model of integrity, a powerful force for Queens and a friend of good government. Do you want to come up, Claire? Yeah, yeah. It's maybe a little stiff. Or do you? The photograph is of Claire speaking at our City Law breakfast in 1998. I think she's waving one of the gifts we gave her on that occasion. 16 years as Queensborough president. She was as I said earlier about, she was a power at as the Queensborough president, and the one that was the leader of the borough presidents at the time. She came to it later in life. She started off at the Delphi College, Bachelor of Science, a registered nurse, met her husband Mel Schuman, both a doctor, both working at Queens Hospital Center, became active in civic affairs, just as Errol suggested. Got active on a community board, then started to work at the Borough President's office, where she became, in 1972, Queens Director of Community Boards, and then in 1980, Deputy Borough President. And then on January 28, 1986, became the acting borough president at a time of great sensation and difficulty for the city, that the moment when Donald Maness had to resign, and she became the acting borough president at age 60, and then was voted 2 months later as the Queensborough president by the city council, and then won 3 elections on her own, and finally term limited out, but a very strong elected official. She was the first female borough president of Queens, and only the second woman to serve on the Board of Estimate, then the most powerful board of the city. And she said about being a woman in politics, I love this, she says, "I didn't have a tough job because I was so much older than everybody else, and they were afraid to deal with me." They didn't say, "We're not going to listen to her because she's a woman." They said, "We better listen to her because she's like our mother." And another time she said, "I put a lot of shovels in the ground," and she did. One of the things that she did for Queens is she built and she built and she built the courthouses, the third water tunnel leading into Queens, the Air Train, National Tennis Center, Queens Museum, Hall of Science, Flushing Meadows swimming pool, stormwater drains, very important in Queens, I remember that. CUNY Law School, the Social Security Administration moving to Jamaica, Kaufman Astoria Studios, Silver Cup Studios, Museum of the Moving Image, 35,000 classrooms in Queens. She built, and so successfully, it was such a powerhouse in bringing things to Queens. One newspaper said of her, "One of the greatest power brokers Queens has ever seen," and she was. I have an extremely strong image in my mind of Claire Schulman. When I was Commissioner of Transportation, Alice, my wife, and I went out to Queens because we were doing a midnight paving of the streets, which we were late in doing, and Claire had called and said, we got to do this, and so we're paving these streets in Queens, and I have a crew of 20 people in these big machines, and it was about midnight or 1 in the morning, and Claire Schulman arrives. She wants to see what's going on. Next thing I know, she's on top of the paving machine wearing a hard hat and driving the machine. She's actually paving the streets of Queens. I said, oh my God, do we have insurance for this? She was wonderful to work with. A pleasure, a powerhouse, and she's still at it. She's now she's the CEO and president of the Flushing Willis Point Corona LDC. She hasn't stopped at age 90. And we honor Claire Schulman. Let me just read it says, for her extraordinary service for 15 years as the Borough President of Queens, where with energy and ingenuity she inspired, created, built superb cultural, health, and educational institutions for the people of Queens. Thank you so much.
That was a pretty good introduction. I ought to quit while I'm ahead. But thank you, Russ, and thank you for this great honor. When I started as a government official, for money, that is, I did a lot of pro bono work before that. I decided to figure out how to make the government work and how to make it work for the people. And when I got to be deputy and then borough president, I got the best staff I could find in the city of New York. And they became an incredible team. Not only did they did not compete with each other. They worked on the project as a team, and that went from the deputy on down to the secretaries. And I accept this honor, really, for Peter Magnani, who was a deputy, Alex Rosa, who's here with me today, who was the exec, Nick Garifas, who you know, was my counsel, and probably the best engineer in the city of New York was Mike Sinansky. And let me tell you, you can't do anything in this city without a good consulting engineer. Because he is your defense against all the engineers in city government. And so we set about picking up projects that we knew that would last and would be the future of the borough. We really had no major institutions in Queens. And so we went ahead and we did that. And we worked as a team and we did these wonderful things. It was incredible. The Hall of Science, which is now an international recognized museum, is a wonderful institution and has done great things for the children of Queens and the city of New York. I see Jeff Friedlander here. I spent half my life with Jeff Friedlander. And Pat Hines is here. And if it wasn't for Pat Hines, I wouldn't be here because she saved my life in 1986. And I guess you know what that means. But anyway, we worked very hard and we built a lot of institutions in the borough. And I really wanted to be here to tell you that it can be done. It can be done. You can create wonderful things for your city if you are in government. But you have to focus and you have to be persistent, because the people that have other interests are not going to want you to accomplish what it is you set out to do. And so for all of the young people who want to come into government, believe me, we can write you a textbook on how to do it. And I see Dave Dinkins here, and I want to tell you one story about Dave. We tried to do a sewer in southeast Queens. 250,000 people had water in the basement, because the houses were built right after World War II without any infrastructure. And so we tried very hard. I got a hold of DEP, and their engineer told us it was a kink in the pipe. Well, what do I know about that stuff? So I had Mike Sinansky look. It's no kink. They don't have sewers. So you have to watch out for city agencies because they don't always tell you the truth. And so we set about trying to get this damn sewer in the ground, and Albany gave us a lot of trouble because they were into snail darters. And so we couldn't find an outfall for that sewer because it might damage snail darters. And so, forget the people who had all the water in the basement, that sewer took us, believe it, and you have to focus, 10 years. And David Dinkins was the reason that we finally got Albany to bend. Because David put a guy in DEP, tall red-headed guy, right? Remember him? From the Audubon Society. And he went to Albany and he said, get off the snail darters and let's have an outfall for this sewer. And I want to tell you, that sewer was a $100 million effect. It ran from Kennedy Airport to Grand Central Parkway, and an enormous sewer. And as it moved north, the laterals were constructed. And each time the laterals were constructed, a neighborhood was saved. And so, David Dinkins, thank you very much for that sewer. That's really all I have to say, except I want to leave you with a message, and that is government can work. Just make it do it. Thank you. My legs are 90, but the rest of me don't
Now you see the power. I mean, it's the sewers. Those are the infrastructure, what's needed in government. And that's what the people want. Anthony, come on, close it out for us. Close it out for us.
So I think I'm more inspired than ever before, and one of the things that I think is so rich about New York City and municipal service is understanding our history. Our history couldn't be more interesting, more provocative, and more exciting because it provides such a foundation for a wonderful future, a future that all of you are helping the city be led into, but also what we do here at the law school, create a new generation of lawyers and public leaders and people who care, people who want to make a difference. And so this is all about making a difference. And may everyone we graduate here, may everyone in this room aspire to be the kinds of leaders that we've honored today, and maybe we all achieve civic fame in our own rights. Thank you.